So let's get started. Complaint management. With complaint management, you are able to register and process complaints from either customers or vendors, or even also you can use it for internal complaints if you would love to. And next to registering those complaints, you can then work with assigned tasks, track expenses to certain complaints, have the related documents in place. Basically, everything related to a complaint is seamlessly integrated with each other. So basically, you can, like I said, register complaints from customers and vendors. Then you can assign tasks to people in your organization to follow up on those complaints. And for that, you can make use of certain workflows, which you can customize. And you're also able to block certain processes when a complaint is coming into play. And I will show that later to you in the live demo as well. Of course, we also are supporting a clear history of all those complaints. You can even also see the complaints on a per item level. Could you please mute yourself? Yeah, thanks. Um, so you can, on a per item level, you can see how many complaints there have been for that specific item. You can also consolidate multiple complaints to each other. Also, you can work with related complaints. You can imagine if you get a complaint from a customer and that the issue has been caused by a vendor, you can then link the customer complaint with a vendor complaint, for example. But I suggest we get started with showing you in Business Central. So let's do a short demo around complaint management. And for that, I would love to switch to my Business Central environment. So here we are in a normal Business Central environment. Of course, it's an empowered Business Central environment. As you can see over here, we have the empowered menu. And if I quickly go to the module configuration, which is basically the start after empowered Business Central has been deployed, you are then able to enable or disable the features you like. As you might know, if you choose for empowered Business Central, you choose a specific industry bundle, and with that you get a lot of additional features available. But of course, it's up to you which features you want to enable in the system. So in this case, you can see that complaint management has been enabled, and then of course all the related menus, etc., will be visible to the users. So after enabling complaint management in the module configuration, of course, we start with the setup. So therefore, let me go to the complaint management setup. The easiest way, of course, is always to search for it. So we go to the complaint management setup, and there are some generic stuff you need to fulfill before you can make use of complaint management within an Empowered Business Central. So first of all, you could work with a default person in your organization who is responsible for handling all the complaints, which you can assign over here. Of course, you need to work with a number series for complaints, and next to those very generic stuff, you can also work with email standard text. If you can imagine, if you're registering complaints for customers, you would love to send them a confirmation of the receipt of the complaint to them, or a status update, or once the complaint has been solved, you want to email that, and therefore you can make use of the standard text to send updates to your customers. Then after this generic setup, we really start configuring the complaints. And to start with, you can configure your complaint reason codes. Basically, think of reasons why people and why customers could complain or share a complaint with you as an organization. So for example, if you're trading goods, you can get complaints about delays, or goods which have arrived broken, or they received goods which they didn't order, or just imagine all types of reasons why people could complain. Therefore, you can configure specific reason codes, because like I said, with the customized workflows, you are then able to define different workflows or work with different responsible persons to follow up on those complaints. And you are completely free to create your own list of complaint reason codes. The other thing you would like to configure is the level of gravity, because if you have chosen those multiple reason codes for complaints, of course, there is a difference in the urgency of some complaints if you compare them with other. So in this case, I simply chose to work with low, medium, and high in terms of level of gravity, which basically gives you a sign of the urgency of a complaint. And based on that, you can also define next steps, or as you can see over here, also work with different persons who are responsible for taking up on this complaint. The last thing you need to configure up front is the default complaint type. Like I shared in the presentation before, you're able to work with complaints from customers or complaints from vendors. Therefore, you can work with default complaints type. So for example, I created the ones for customer and vendors. And as you can see over here, just as you can imagine, for customers, the complaints should have the level of gravity high, because there is some urgency and you want to have a quick follow-up on those. And then after you've created those default complaint types for both customer and vendors, you can choose default complaint statuses to work with, because you can imagine at first you get a phone call or you get an email with that complaint from your customer. So the first step will then be that the complaint will be reported. And then, of course, you need to fill in all the required information. And then basically you are registering the complaint. And then after that, you have probably kind of an investigation period where people are working with the complaints. And of course, at the end, you can solve the complaints and close them. It's good to know that, of course, you can create your own status codes, but there are a few status types which are mandatory. As you can see over here, the first one is new. Basically, it's required that, of course, the first status of a complaint needs to have the status type new. And of course, you can imagine at the end it needs to be solved and needs to be closed. So those are required status types in the default complaint statuses. One option is manual. As you can see over here, the third status is investigation, which has the status type manual. This is basically just an optional step you can enter between every of the mandatory statuses to create your own processes of the steps of the complaints. And within those statuses, you can then assign default tasks which need to be fulfilled to handle this complaint. So for example, as soon as the complaint will be registered, there are some complaint tasks which you can then assign to certain persons or to teams. So for example, in this case, just for the demo purpose, I created the task to assign the investigation to the related department. So as soon as the complaint gets the status registered, there's a new task which will be sent to that user to send it to the right department. So those are the requirements to set up complaint management, and now I would love to show you how that results into working with complaints in Empower Business Central. So therefore, let me go back to the role center and we go to complaints, and let's simply register a new complaint. So let's imagine we are a furniture trading company and we get a complaint from a customer, and we are now basically reporting that complaint into the system. So it's a complaint type from a customer. You immediately see, by the way, for example, level of gravity, it will be automatically filled with high since we have configured that in the setup. And then the complaint is about goods are arrived broken, for example. You can enter additional information over here as well. And then you can assign a default, a person who's responsible to handle this complaint. And as you can see over here, the status code of this complaint. Please keep in mind remember the status codes I showed you in the setup. And the first step is reported. So that's the first status code the complaint will have by default. Of course, you can work with creation dates and dates received. And then you need to choose the reason code. What's the reason of this complaint? I made a very obvious example. Goods are arrived broken. So in this case, the reason codes goods arrived broken. Since the complaint is from a customer, then of course we can select the customer who is reporting the complaint. You can also even assign a contact person, which is a relevant step. Of course, it's not required, but if you want to make use of those interactions, send emails with those standard texts, etc., it will be sent to the contact number which is assigned over here in this field. So if you want to register interactions, then it's good to know that, of course, you need to work with contact persons over here. Then you can also assign or relate the related document to this complaint. So for example, this is about, let's say, a posted sales invoice, and they already got the invoice. Well, goods are arrived broken, and then you can select the invoice. Then you get a pop-up with the question, do you want to fill up the claim with the source document lines? And if I now click on yes, and if I scroll down, you will see that the items which were all on the posted sales invoice will then be also put on the lines in this complaint card, just to have all the relevant information on hand if you're going to follow up on this complaint. Even also possible, if you scroll further down, there are costs. Here, for example, you can fill in the related costs to this complaint. So for example, hours of resources, or costs you make to send additional items, or substitutions or whatsoever, that can be filled in on this complaint card as well. Because then, if we go back to the top in the header, here you see the cost totals. Basically, you can then see how much costs are involved with this complaint. Another interesting option I would love to share you is that next to simply select the document where the complaint is related to and have the line information on the complaint card, you can also here work with blocked documents in the fact box. So if I here, for example, choose new, I can then select the sales invoice. So let's select the same sales invoice. And now in the fact box, you will see that sales invoice is now marked as a blocked document. This results in the fact that as soon as you are creating, for example, your reminders, or you have an automatic process for creating your reminders and send them to your end customers, this particular posted sales invoice will be skipped from the reminder creation process. And because you could imagine, if you're working with your customers on a specific complaint, it doesn't make sense to at the same time also constantly remind them by sending them a reminder about an overdue sales invoice. So by marking them as a blocked document, it will be skipped in the reminder process. That also applies to if this complaint would be a complaint to a vendor. Then of course you can link the purchase invoice, and then that particular purchase invoice will be skipped in your payment suggestion creation process. So as soon as you're starting to create your payment suggestions, that particular purchase invoice will be skipped as well, for the same obvious reasons. If there's a complaint around a particular purchase invoice, probably it also would make sense to not pay that invoice already. So by default, it will then be skipped in the process from your payment suggestions. After you filled in all the complaints, you can register the complaint, and then you get a new pop-up. Do you want to notify the customer? And that's why I said, okay, if you fill in the contact number, you work with your email standard text, then with this action, the customer will get an email. For now, I will click on no. What I also want to show you is the complaint status over here. As you can see over here, those are the same statuses, of course, as we have configured in the setup. But here you also see the open tasks which are related to this complaint. The complaint has now been changed into the status registered. And here you see that there is one open task for this person to complete before, for example, a due date, if you want to make use of that. Those tasks will, of course, appear in the user task list for the user in Business Central, so they can easily follow up on all the complaints where they are marked as the responsible person to follow up on these complaints. And with that, I've showed you how you can create those complaints. And of course, if I go back to the role center or to the list of all the complaints, here you have an overview of all the open complaints. And as soon as complaints are solved and closed, you will see that the complaints will be visible to you in the archive complaints. So you will have an overview of all the log, of all the historical complaints which have been completed, closed, and solved. With that, let me go back to the presentation. So I showed you complaint management in just a very short overview of how you can make use of complaint management in Empowered Business Central. And it's also good to know, and that I've heard that some partners are using this for their end customers, not particular for handling complaints, but more generic as a kind of a ticket system. Because as you can imagine, the process behind working with tickets is more or less the same as complaints. So if you work with customers who can raise support tickets or whatsoever, of course the complaint management module could be more or less be used also in that case. So that's another advantage of complaint management, that it also can be used as a more or less a lightweight ticket handling system.